Hi, I'm Steve. Welcome to my new YouTube channel. So one of the first vehicles I can really remember having, it was a red toy buggy. Must have been in the early 80s. I can remember the way my house was laid out when I would play with it, and then my house changed back then along the way. We made additions and changes and things like that. So I'm guessing 83, 84, something like that. It was I spent a long time looking for this buggy. I started reaching out on message boards about 10 years ago, just describing it by memory, not having any idea what it was or who made it. And I came along, one guy who knew what it was and actually had one. And he sent me pictures. It was definitely it. And he didn't want to part with it. So, I thanked him for at least giving me the information, knowing what it was. And then I continued to search. And lo and behold, in December 2019, I found one on eBay, and it was incorrectly described. So I happened to see the picture in the listing in the on that page full of listings, and I said that looks familiar. I clicked on it, and it was the Azrak Hamway, also Remco. I think imported it. This is Remco. It's a Top Gun, and the thing that made this car unique and memorable for me was that it was actually it had a 2-speed gearbox with a button on the controller that shifted gears. And I remember pressing that button, and the car would go slower and faster, and I remember killing all the C-cells and running out of batteries, and it was a good time. So you don't see these almost ever, and by the grace of the hobby gods, this thing popped up on eBay, and I grabbed it for $35. It in the box, the paperwork's all in there. It looks like it was perhaps never used. There was no wear on the chassis, no wear on the tires. Lucky, right? So I picked it up, got it. It came to the house and opened it up, and didn't work. And I didn't really care because I was happy. I had the car. I just wanted to have it as a collectible. But I got to thinking, what if I take it apart? Maybe I can get it going with some modern electronics. I knew it would probably be a challenge because it had that crazy gearbox. I don't know how I was going to address that, but only one way to find out was to take it apart. So that's what I did. So here's a better look at it. You can see it's in really good shape. There's some, the decals are peeling a little bit here and there just from time. I have run this, but even since I've run it and just in the house, you can see how little wear is on the tires. They'd be marked up if they were, if a kid had this back in the day and beat the crap out of it like we did. So, I was speechless when it arrived. Again, I was, minor disappointment that it didn't work, but I didn't really care at that point. So let me show you some other things about it. So here's the controller I was talking about. This button here would shift the transmission from low to high gear and back again. You press it, shift up, press it again, it would shift down. And then just your standard controls, forward and back here, turning, and trims. The only thing that worked when I received it was the throttle. It would not turn and it would not shift gears. So once I got it apart, I found that I believe what the issue was, what you would call servos that steered the car and shifted the transmission were operational, but the grease and whatever else that was in them had solidified and just wouldn't let the gears turn. So I ended up replacing the steering servo, but I did reuse the servo that was installed in the factory for the transmission. So let's take this thing apart and I'll show you how I made it work. Okay, so there are 8 screws that hold the chassis and the body together. There's 2 up here in the front, 2 right here. There's 2 inside the battery box, and then 2 more back here. So I've taken them out, and then the body shell just pops right off. There's nothing attaching, no wiring or anything, charge ports, anything like that. All right, what this used to have in it was there was a controller board that sat on top of this all, and it has some connections into this battery box. The battery box is pretty typical on the early 80s RC cars that came out of Asia. This is probably made in Taiwan or China or something like that. Made in China. There it is, right there. What it did, it had 4 AA cells up top, and I'll open this up so you can see how they were laid out. So these 4 AA cells that went in here ran the radio, the controller board itself, and then the 5 C cells, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a 5th one here, would provide power to a separate circuit that drove the motor. Because the the AA's were sufficient to run that controller board. It didn't draw much current. It just ran the steering. And then the C cells provided the additional amperage and capacity required to keep the car running for a while. So I pulled all that out. You can see here, this is the servo that runs the transmission shift. There was a very similar device up front here where this servo is. I just replaced it with a Futaba 3003. Those are great for this type of project. Really cheap, like 12 bucks. So I'll talk about everything except the transmission first, because everything else was simple. So the steering servo, you can see here, I had to shim it up off the chassis a little bit. That's a piece of plywood. Then the servo is just double taped on there. It holds fine. I was able to use the remaining linkage that was in the car. All I did was I put a little a ball on the end of this servo horn, and it went right into the cavity where the original servo attached. And the steering is extremely effective and much more accurate than it used to be. The speed controller is an old HPI SC15, I think I had laying around. Yeah, it's actually waterproof. This will not see water, but just in case. So that I ran the battery connection through this hole that was already here in the battery box to a little EC30 connector, and I can plug a LiPo into that, so that's nice. This is a 3-cell. Actually, no, this speed controller only handles 2-cell, so that's a 2-cell speed controller. Motor connections, you can see, very straightforward, right onto the motor where they attached from the factory. There's a charge port back here I did not reuse because we can't charge a LiPo with a wall charger. That's a bad idea. And the receivers here, it's just a Hobby King 3XS system that I had laying around. It's a pretty capable system. They don't sell it anymore, but when they did, it was popular. It was inexpensive. It's 3 channels. It's got a little computer readout. You can do a lot of customization to each model. It holds, I think, 10 model memories, so it's a nice little radio set. This switch I leave on all the time. This is the power for the speed controller, and what I did, you can see here, I actually ran the power wire to this terminal, because I'll tell you why later. It had to supply power to this thing. But then before it gets to the speed controller, I ran it through this switch. So this factory on-off switch actually controls the power on the car, and the on-off switch from the speed controller just remains on all the time. So that way you don't have to worry about getting inside the car to turn it on or off. So that's about it for the standard retrofit. Like I said, though, this one had this guy, this crazy gearbox. So it is an honest-to-God 2-speed gearbox. It's not like the Tyco cars where they had a turbo function, which just, lets you push the throttle all the way forward. This was 2 mechanical speeds with a gear change. I initially thought I might just put a hobby servo in there, but when I took this out, it's not square. It actually has a cutout that goes around this C-cell here. So you cannot fit a standard servo there. So that's when I decided to take it apart and see if I can make it work. And like I said earlier, the only real issue was that it was frozen up from, years of not being used. So hang tight. We're going to dig a little deeper into how I made the transmission shift work. So I've got a 2-cell LiPo in here. I hope it's charged. I haven't checked, but it'll have enough voltage to do what we're doing. So I'll put this door back on here. I've got this tape here because this guy was very loose. It would actually flop open while I was running the car. So with the tape in place there, it just shims up the tab a little bit, so there's more friction on that tab. Keeps it shut. All right. Use the factory switch, like I said, to turn the car on. So you got your steering with the standard servo. That works very well, you can see, nice and quick. Forward and reverse both work. And then we have the transmission. So real quick, I'll show you how it shifts. So that's one gear. Let's see. So you can see that's low gear. You can see the tires are spinning at one speed there. If I shift it back down, that's going to be high gear. And they spin much faster. So that's neat. You know, you don't see that. You didn't see that a lot in the old cars. You don't really see it nowadays either. So that's a unique little option that I really like about this car. I had no idea how it worked. So I just had to stare at it for a long time. And what I found was that it's pretty simple. So you've got this contact board here, right? And you can see it's got two metal strips that go that way, longitudinally across the car. Or I guess they'd be laterally. And then you have this other contact plate, which is just a straight across bar as well, but it's attached underneath this round servo horn. And what happens is this wire provides power to the servo in the board. You can see that it connects a circuit here. As long as there's continuity between these two panels, this servo will turn. But as it's sitting in the middle here, there's nothing to get that going. So what the controller board did, I'm guessing, is it sent just a quick voltage pulse to this servo to just push it a little bit and then let go. And then once the contacts, once there was contact made on these plates, it would continue to rotate until it passed, the edge of the plate, and electrical continuity would be broken and it stopped. So the way I did that, I put a third servo here. It's a little micro servo. It's just double-sided taped to this larger servo. And a little micro switch I had laying around. And all this servo does is tap this switch. And it gets that guy moving. And then since the switch immediately breaks contact, as soon as this gets to the center, it stops again. So I'm probably doing a terrible job describing it and making it sound way more complicated than it is. But long story short, this switch just bumps this little contact to get it moving. Once it's moving, electrical contact is maintained through these plates. And then when it gets through its cycle, it breaks contact and it stops moving. And it's a simple and effective mechanism. I was kind of impressed with it. And, I don't know how long this plastic's going to hold up, so I'm not going to shift it much more, but it works. So I'll tell you what, let's put it back together, and I'll do a quick test run, show you how she runs, and that'll be about it for this one. Okay, I'm going to do my very best to record this video with one hand and drive with the other. So here she is, all ready to go, low gear. So you can see the blistering speed. That is full speed and low gear. So it was a real threat on the racetrack, and then we'll go ahead and shift it up into high gear. Sorry for the shaky camera. All right, you can see that it actually shifted, and the high gear is a little more fun. I had some. Let me set the trim here a little bit. All right, so there she moved around. This was the speed you would use it at most of the time, but if you wanted to climb a steep hill or that kind of thing, you did get a lot more torque in the low gear, for sure. But that's it. Alright, so there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that. She runs great. Definitely going to hold on to this one forever. I see no reason to ever let it go. I definitely want to thank, I look back after I ran the car, I want to thank Rob from RCToyMemories.com. He's the person who took the time to reach out to me. We went through a couple cars, actually, looking back at my emails, and landed on this one, and that was it. So Rob, thanks. Check out his website, RCToyMemories.com, if you have time. Looks like he's still updating that, so that's good. So thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you're interested in any future videos I put out, and be sure to check out my website, StevesHobbies.com. Thanks for watching.